Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact.
Hi, this is Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor podcast. And today's guest is Ken Monroe. Ken Monroe is the president of HOLT of California, which is a Caterpillar dealer in Northern and Central California. He's a second-generation family member in a fourth-generation family business. And Ken, like some of my other guests, is what you might call an accidental entrepreneur, because he didn't come to work thinking or come into life thinking, I'm going to join the family business. He had other plans. And so let's get started right there. Ken, what did you graduate? Welcome to the show, first of all. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Nice to be here.
And what was your studies in school that you were graduating from, or thinking that what kind of field were you thinking of going into?
Well, I was always interested in business. So I was actually at a small liberal arts college with an economics degree and some business. So I was always interested in business, fooled around with some entrepreneur type businesses right out of school, then traveled a little bit, got married, had kids, thought I better get a real job, went to work for a bank, ended up down in LA, and was going down that path of a career. And my father had actually worked for the Caterpillar dealer in Stockton, California, since 1962 is when he started. Family business started by actually grandnephews of Benjamin Holt, little history, who invented the Caterpillar tractor in Stockton, California.
Wow, that's history for you.
Yeah, it is history. And so these two brothers, the Holts, ran the business. They had a son-in-law in the business. When they retired, my dad had an opportunity to buy in with the son-in-law as a partner. And a few years after that, they were thinking of continuity and getting a little push from Caterpillar that, you need to look at this because we want continuity. They distribute only through dealers, and in the U.S., all of those dealers are family-owned businesses.
Isn't that interesting? Is that just coincidental? Or is that cultural, you think? Caterpillar encouraged it?
I think it evolved over time. In 1925, Cat elected to go with dealers, and I think it evolved that those dealers became family businesses, and a number of there are family businesses, Cat dealers, that are 100 years old. They actually predated Caterpillar. They represented the Holts, who were a manufacturer, made Caterpillar, and a company called Best. They represented one of those. So there's about 45 Cat dealers in the U.S., all of them family owned, and probably the youngest one is maybe 50 years and much older than that. So an interesting thing. And I think they realized in the mid 80s that if family businesses don't do some continuity planning, it was going to impact their business, because we have geographic territories. And if somebody doesn't do a good job of that transition, they could be hurting for sales in a particular area.
Right.
So I got acquainted with it through a family business session that my dad invited me to, and he and his partner, after a few months afterwards, called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to the business?" So I got started that way back in the late 80s.
What was your role when you first came into the business? Did you have like a title or a function?
Yeah, it was salesman.
That's a common way to get into the business. Yeah.
Well, it was so it was a time when Cat had introduced a small line of equipment. They're known for their biggest stuff. Well, they had introduced a backhoe loader, and the existing salesman really didn't want to sell it. So I was the kid they brought in to sell the stuff that nobody else wanted to deal with, and worked for my dad directly. He was in charge of sales. So I stepped into a situation where I was working directly for him with something I had really no idea what the heck I was talking about. going out and knocking on doors.
So I have to just interrupt to say it sounds a little familiar of my father's story. My father came into my grandfather and great grandfather's business, and they didn't really have a place for him or my uncle. So they created a line of clothing. They were men's suit manufacturing wholesalers, and they created a line that was named after my father and my uncle, Walter and Jerry. They called it Walger, and it was a knockoff of some of their other stuff. And they said, go sell this stuff. We're not going to put any, we're going to put all the cost of goods onto our other product lines. So, whatever you sell will be gravy, and see if you can make something of this. So,
yeah.
Funny.
And away you go.
Away you go. Exactly. Yeah. So, all right. So tell us today, how big is your business? How many locations do you have? How many employees do you have? I understand you've built quite an operation. So,
yeah, well, just fast forward about 10 years from when I joined the business. My dad's partnered by the guy named Vic Wyckoff and a gentleman up in the Sacramento area in California. The dealership up there got together and said, we probably aren't big enough to be an ongoing Caterpillar dealer. We really should get together. So we, after a year and a half of discussion, formed what's HOLT of California today. Mm. And that's when I took over as president, and we pretty much doubled our size at that point. Since that time, we've expanded, so we carry a lot of products that actually started as Caterpillar and not. So in the ag world, we carry a whole thing from a manufacturer called AGCO, forklifts from another manufacturer. And so we've grown that. And so we're now actually in the CAT business, we represent Central California. In the AGCO business, we're Central California all the way up into Oregon, just recently acquired that. So we've expanded outside of the Caterpillar lines, but we're now about 800 employees, about 22 locations, spread throughout Northern California into Oregon is our business. So
impressive. And when you took over in 1999, give us a frame of reference. How many employees, how many locations, if you can recall?
We were just under 400 employees, and location-wise, there were probably 5 or 6 locations.
Okay. So 2x 20 years, nice.
We're very satisfied with it. Now we have all the manufacturers we represent, they are very high quality, very great products. CAT is kind of the one we put on the front door, and so a lot of great backing with them. We really look at it as a partnership, and they view it that way also. So a little different than a car dealer or some of the franchises, the way we operate, but similar in that you've got a big brother out there who's global and brings things to the table that we as a company probably wouldn't go out and try to tackle.
And I imagine you can't sell any competing products.
Correct.
But you could sell stuff that was complementary.
Absolutely. Right.
I always say, sell something that the same purchaser buys either before, during, or after the sale. That's
the business model. We sell and rent big equipment, then we sell the parts and the service to that. So that's the ongoing business model. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So if you've 2x'd in 20 years, I'm just assuming based on employee size, that's about a 3 or 4% annual growth, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Dividing 20 into 72, using the rule of 72. And so that's really, you've had a very controlled growth. It's been a very manageable business, it sounds like, or have there been some peaks and valleys with acquisitions?
None of it's been controlled. It's semi out of control all the time. Well, it's interesting. We started in 99. At this new venture. It was when things were starting to heat up in residential construction, which we supply a lot of equipment to. So we really were booming up till about 2008.
Right.
And then it crashed. And so we were double digit going up, and we were double digit coming down.
Wow.
When you average it all out, it sounds like a nice, easy ride. But
right.
It was not that way. And so from about 2009 it took us till about 2014 to get back onto where we were in 2000 and 9. I mean, it was about a 5-year slow wrap up. So it's been one of those kind of rides, not a nice gradual slow.
Understood. So pop quiz question. To a listener who is enjoying the construction, wind at their back, great 10-year run, and they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's going to be a cycle when things go down. What advice might you give them, or what advice would you give your younger self looking back on that?
Well, don't think you're a genius because you're growing double digit.
Right.
And be very careful when you start to hear things like, gee, this will never change. Fundamentally, this will just go on forever. It's great to take advantage of it, but there's certainly caution you have to take when things are growing that fast. We have a lot of long-term employees. I think our longest term employee was about 63 years. We've got a number of people who 40 and 50 years is not uncommon. So we really value having people a long time. When things drop that dramatically and you have to lay people off, it is emotionally draining.
Yeah.
So trying to balance that, not just throwing people at everything that might happen. Because in the downturn, you don't want to lose those folks. You want to have them on for a long time. So those are the things that I've learned. I'm not sure how it will work in the next go around, and that there's a cycle. I mean, one of the clear-cut things is we live in cycles. Now, they may not be as deep as that was in 2008, but we anticipate cycles and try to look forward to. Do we really want to grow this next couple of years, or we start to just kind of minimize a little bit, not try to reach the peak with everything we can do?
Well, I have to say, and maybe you want to comment on this, I think some of my clients' biggest concerns are, as they're growing, hey, we're really growing. Growth, we know the law of gravity, growth sucks cash. So do we buy equipment? Do we lease equipment? Do we, how do we finance it? Should we buy used equipment? I mean, these are questions that companies that are growing fast they don't want to be stuck with a whole lot of equipment and then having to make the tough people decisions because they're paying have a payment. So.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we were very careful about was the debt we took on to grow. We didn't get out above our skis in debt. And believe me, when things are going good, there's plenty of people who lend you plenty of money. And as soon as it hiccups, they're out your front door. So we tried to stay pretty conservative with our borrowings, which maybe limited the total upside that we could have done.
Sure.
But it put us in a much better, solid position when things started to crash down upon us.
I was watching ski racing on TV last night, and there's nothing so true about either getting ahead of getting out in front of your skis or getting behind your skis. I watched both mistakes of the racers yesterday, and they lose, 0.2 of a second, 1 second. It's the difference between being first and second or last. So it's pretty small. All right, let's get into some of the family dynamics. So in 1999, the business transition. So the company was formed in 1939. Let me just back up. Your family got involved in that at that time in the business, I think.
In the 60s, actually. My
60s,
dad went to work as an employee in the 60s.
60s, okay, sorry. And then in 30 years later, it's transitioning from your dad to you. What was that transition like? Were there challenges? They talk about it being the sticky baton syndrome, where the father doesn't let go, and it's
like everything that we're kind of a hybrid family business. So it was so my dad was a partner, and when we merged the company, there were 3 senior partners: my dad and his partner, and then the gentleman who ran the Sacramento dealership. The 2 of them, the 2 presidents, my dad was executive vice president, were not interested really in running things at that point. So I took over for them, and my dad actually worked for me. So we went from it worked pretty well, but he stayed in the kind of the sales role, and in that role, and I took on the expanded bigger role. And that first review I gave him was an interesting one. Okay, Dad, let's talk about when I was 16. Now, you remember that time? And I would say over that time, there were really, I will give him a ton of credit for stepping into the role where he let me do things, whether he thought it was right or not. The two senior other partners stepped back and let me really run things. And he took his role on, which he was very good at, about driving our sales and our product support side of things. So there were only probably 2 or 3 times in the next 17 or 18 years where we really went toe to toe, where he was just very frustrated and really been here a long time, very well respected. And when he started talking negative about things, people listened.
Right.
And I really had to step in and say, look, if you're going to why don't you retire? Because I can't overshadow your negativity if you're really upset with something. And to his credit, he listened and kind of modified his behavior. And probably the only other time was when a few years into this thing, it was a much bigger animal than he'd been used to managing.
Right.
And the stress of that was coming through with I had his employees coming to me saying, hey, your dad's really hard on us, and I had to really pull him aside and help him get through that. And so anyway, it was a very different transition than what most family businesses have, in that he was working for me. And I to this day, really admire his ability to stay focused on the job, enjoy it, and not let me get in his way, and vice versa. So,
well, I have to say, that's more common in my world than not, where the son or daughter is running the parent's business. And I always have to ask them, so do you call them dad or do you call them by their first name? And because that's sort of a significant marker of, are we equals? Are we now, it's a different relationship inside the business. We're Ken and Ron, we're CEO and, head of sales, and maybe chairman of the board. So, different roles, but.
And I always called him dad. Actually, that was one of the, and
endearing.
It was some thought. And actually I've had that conversation with my kids who joined the business, said, up to you. You can call me dad, you can call me Ken, you can call me whatever you want to call me, but it's up to you. I was very comfortable calling him dad about all of that. It didn't change our relationship as far as driving the business. And even though he technically worked for him, he still brought a lot to the table that I learned from. So that was
sure.
That was
sure. Okay, so now there's 2 other generations in the business. Tell us a little bit about.
Well, so when we merged the company, there were 3 families that participated, and it was a 50-50 merger. The only difference was I had voting control, and we had a number of family members from the Sacramento dealership that worked in the business. And one of those remains. Now we call him my business son. He's part of my succession plan. And then my son and daughter, we do have some rules in place about if you want to come to work here, you need to go get a degree, go do something else, be successful at it, and spend some time out. In Ryan's case, Ryan's my business son. He was working here when we merged, and we talked about him leaving the company for a while, but he decided to stay and really got his experience working through all of our different divisions to kind of get up to where he is today. My son and daughter spent some time doing other things. My daughter joined us about 7 years ago. And then my son, who'd been very standoffish about joining the business, just never really was doing very well what he was doing, enjoyed what he was doing, and liked where they were living. Just in the last few months joined the business. So just started. So it's an interesting balance now of getting them kind of up to speed, and Ryan leading kind of the next, he would be the next person to probably succeed me in running the business.
And that's Ryan's the business son.
Yeah, the business son.
And is there a written succession plan around this? I mean,
there is. We we've this is one of my lessons in terms of I figured I could probably do that myself.
Mm-hmm.
And we did put some things together. We really early on, we put kind of I don't know what you'd call it, but just kind of the values that we had as the three families. What are we going to call ourselves?
Sure.
What are we going to take to work here? We put that in place for everybody to read and look at, and shared that with all of the kids at the time.
We call those I think oftentimes called a family constitution, but it might be the core values of the business.
Yeah, we didn't call it that, but it would be similar to that
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. And that's what we used to get. So we had some things in writing. We'd started talking about continuity planning and things we needed to do. It wasn't until people keep asking me, so how much longer are you going to have? And I say 10 years. Well, 5 years into that, and I'm still saying 10 years.
Of course.
If somebody does the math, I'm in trouble.
Right.
So we hired a consulting group to come in and really help us do that. And what I found out of it was, they were much more able to put a clear, concise, hey, here's what you really have to get accomplished plan together. And here's the metrics probably to use for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered also that while I thought I had a pretty good open relationship with that whole group, and I do, that this allowed them to have conversations with somebody and maybe dive a little deeper into things that they would be uncomfortable bringing up with just me. And they could help facilitate those conversations. So we 2019, 18, 19, we put a very written, okay, here's the milestones we're going to hit. Here's the years we want to do it for. And it's a little unnerving actually, sitting in one of these rooms and someone puts up on the wall, here's the year, Ken, you're out.
I bet. Yeah.
Not ready to hear that yet.
Right.
But it's all for the good. And it was allowed me to, get out my feelings and thoughts about things. And if the goal is going to be to perpetuate the business, you need to do these things to perpetuate the business. So yes, we do have a plan in place, and we're working it every year to see how it goes. Now, it changes. My daughter had a child a year ago, and 6 months into it, decided I think with COVID and everything else going on, I need to back out of here. Mm-hmm. And take a pause. So she's on the board. She's going to go work on getting an MBA, but she's now at home. And then my son decided to join the business a few months ago and started. So we're starting not from scratch, but starting with him. So even within the plan, it's continually being worked as things change.
Gotcha. So are you still working with the consulting group to update that plan and stuff? Yep. Great. Awesome.
A few times a year, and they do a great job of facilitating.
Great. Well, let's give a little plug for them. What's the name of the group?
Banyan Global is the name of the company that we.
Josh Barron was one of my guests on my show. He's the founder of Banyan Global. They were an offshoot from John Davis's organization, exactly. Cambridge. So very talented, very bright,
very
and just wrote a book. We talked about it in my podcast a few weeks back. So good.
I got 6 copies sitting right here. Actually,
good. Let's give a plug for Banyan Global.
Yeah.
So, all right. So does your son, when he came into the business, was he made aware of what this plan looked like, and was he able to review it and see how he fit into it? And
we didn't spend a lot of time on the plan. What we had talked about was, and had been talked about this for a number of years. I mean, I always left the door. It was one of those ones when another lesson learned, if you tell the kids, go out and do what you want to do, and then you can come back in the business, well, they may go out and find out what they like to do is what they like to do and not come back in the business. So without hopefully pushing him, the opportunity was always available for him if he wanted to come into the business. And part of that was, if you're going to come into the business after a certain time, chances of you stepping up and running the business, succeeding me, are probably not going to be the case. So he knew that part coming in, and where his role was going to be over the next 5 or 6 years would be a senior management role based on his abilities, but probably not going to succeed me unless something crazy happens. So we had that conversation.
Yeah.
So he walked in with open eyes about that, I believe.
I think a lot of family members join the business because the financial opportunities and the opportunities for advancement are more maybe known or better, more attractive than going into just another business where you don't necessarily have job security. You don't know what that path is going to look like. So, yeah.
Yep. Very true.
Okay. Interesting. So, does this same group get involved with strategic planning, or as I like to quote Vern Harnish, who's the founder of and wrote the author of the book Scaling Up? Does this same group do strategic thinking and execution planning? He parses the word strategic planning, strategic thinking, execution planning, or is this a different group that does that within the organization?
They are, well. Let's see if I can get this answered succinctly. So Ryan, he's a senior vice president of our Earthmoving and our engine division. He's an active part of our executive team, and that's the group that's doing the strategic planning for the business. Mm-hmm. My daughter was involved in that from a kind of a builder standpoint. My son is just brand new into it, so not involved in it. Now that's running the business. That's the day-to-day operations. Our board, we've just had a change in our board, so all the seniors have rolled off, and we've got a new board put together. And that group will be strategic planning for kind of the broader aspect of where we go. Mm-hmm. Where do we want to put our assets? Do we want to build a facility? Do we want to go after another lines? Those types of things.
Right.
And we're just getting started with them thinking about things that way.
Good. Well, it's good to have that. And the executive team is more involved in the day-to-day execution of the business and metrics and priorities and things like that. Okay. Exactly. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit. So let me introduce you to my book, Disruptive Successor. And in one of the early chapters of my book, I talk about the next generation leaders sort of pathway to 2 to 10x the business. And that is through some kind of innovation. I think it was Peter Drucker who said, marketing and innovation are basically everything to the business. Everything else is just a cost. And so along that lines, I talk about 3 types of innovations. One is a process innovation. The other is a product or service innovation. And the third one is a business model innovation. And by examples, I say that a process innovation might be adopting technology into your customer support or into the services or maybe into your pricing or and I give an example of a product or service innovation as well. That would be like maybe introducing a artificial intelligence or robotics, something altogether different, which within your company would probably come from Caterpillar or your suppliers. And then a business model innovation is, maybe a subscription type model or something completely digital. So what I was talking to you about earlier before we started this call was that I imagine as a dealer, you're limited as what you can do with the products or services. Your suppliers are really in control of that. But there are other innovations you can make with regard to processes. So are there things that you are actively looking at that you can share or disclose, or things that you've recently gone through that would be helpful to listeners?
I'd say, that our manufacturers certainly come up with some of those great ideas, the big stuff. Our job's to execute. And I can tell you from experience, oftentimes their great ideas are baked in generalities. And our world is about specifics.
Yes.
I mean, we have to, give the customer the invoice and make sure they're getting something for that value. So as we go implement a lot of these new GPS tracking, all those things are available. We do have a fair amount of input into how that works because we have to make it work, and it doesn't always work out of the box, I guess, as we've all had some experience to that. So our role in that innovation is, okay, how do we make sure the customer feels good about the value they're getting out of this? Are they getting value out of it? And if they're not, we do have a pretty good roll back to our manufacturers to really push back and say, it's not working the way you thought it was, and keep that conversation going. So we have rolled out kind of everything you've described. We have a whole team that monitors all the equipment that's running in our territory. And in that, we are trying to build a subscription-based thing where you buy the equipment and we'll come out and service it for you. You don't even bring it into our shops. We'll know when it needs to be serviced. We'll let you know we're coming. Our service trucks come out. They'll take care of it for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Your job is to go dig a hole. Our job is to go fix the thing that you want to dig the hole with.
Right.
And so those are the kind of innovations we're doing. And then internally, to your point about process, how do we do that really efficiently? It's a lot of data that comes in, a lot of information, and we're challenging ourselves on how do we really effectively not overwhelm ourselves with all that information and get it done timely and efficiently and give value to the customer for that. So those are the innovations I see us for the next 10 years trying to digest everything that's coming at us technologically wise, and it's a lot. It really is a lot.
I bet. And so who owns this responsibility? Is it the CEO? Do you think of most businesses that are responsible ultimately for the innovations that their customers are wanting and needing? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately it is certainly.
Yeah.
It's how you allocate the resources to go do that is probably my ownership of it. Making sure that we've dedicated the right people and the right money and the right facilities to get that done, but it's going to be up to a whole bunch of other people to execute it correctly and feedback whether we're doing a good job of it or not. I mean, some of the technology, if you're not in it every day, you really don't know how to run it. And I'm not in it every day, so
right.
I'm responsible, but I couldn't probably go down the road and tell you exactly how your machine's running by sitting down on the computer knowing it. I need some help with that.
Understood. And a dealer of your size, do you have someone in the role of innovation or research and development, or is that just put on the manufacturers?
That particular role would be in the manufacturers.
Sure.
I know some of the dealers do have people that they would call that. I think we've tried to incorporate that into the line people's jobs, so they're doing a little bit of both. But we do have resources that we've dedicated to help them improve. We have a group that's a Six Sigma group, and they're dedicated people to go out there, and they really are about that. It's R&D for execution, for lack of a better way of putting it, versus product development.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. All right, let's switch gears again. So Ken, I've been coaching, consulting, training, and financing smaller businesses for 30 years now. And occasionally I've had clients who come to me and they're maybe even a startup, and all they're complaining about is the regulatory environment, doing business in California, the politics, the governor, this, that, or that. And I say, guys, look, hey, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You got to focus on the things that you can control and let go of the things that you can't control, or maybe not let go of them, but focus on the things you can control. And I tell them, like, things you can control are your mindset, your how you sell, how you market your products or services. You can control most of your products or services, unless, of course, you're a franchise or like a dealer. You can control who you hire, what your culture and your organization looks like, how you execute, how you hold people accountable. I mean, those are things that we can control. And then there are things outside of our control, and those are things like death, taxes, regulations. Now, what's interesting to me is you've taken on a challenging role. You're the chairman of the Family Business Association of California. It's based in Sacramento. It's one of the only, or maybe the only, lobbying organization of its kind that's based in a state capital, focused exclusively on matters that relate and impact family businesses. So, what got you interested and involved in this organization? And tell us a little bit about this organization. Mind you, and for those listeners, my first ever guest on this show was a man named Robert Ravinius, who's the executive director of that Family Business Association of California. So you can reference that episode. But tell us a little bit about it.
You described pretty much the way we were in politics for the first 60, 70, 80 years of the business. Our focus was our customers, our employees, and hitting our metrics. And that's really what we came to work with. And then, we would bitch about politics or bitch about this or complain about this or that, the other thing. And that's pretty standard for a lot of family businesses. It takes enough time to get the business done, let alone worry about politics. About 10 years ago, and it spawned out of there was another group in Sacramento called the Capital Region Family Business Center, which was formed, only family businesses are in it, as there's no university associated. And out of that group, we started to talk about family businesses really are not represented politically. There's the chambers, there's industry groups, there's lots of things, but they all go after things kind of with their focus. The chambers got publicly held companies, big companies, not necessarily what we are, and decided we probably needed to get involved to try to make a difference in California politics, because one of the common themes is that most of us are either bound in California. For us to go outside of California, we'd have to go buy another dealer someplace. We have a lot of agricultural based companies that aren't going any place. And then a lot of people who said, I love California. I don't want to move my business, but I'm really finding it difficult to compete and keep up with all of the things that come after. So we started this about 10 years ago now for that purpose. And I just woke up to, I need to get out there and start pushing back. And maybe it's because I'm in the Sacramento area. I see it more often. But some of the regulations and some of the problems that we have in growing our business and then managing our business come from just the capital and the over-regulated amount of stuff we do. And I feel for a lot of the entrepreneurs. I've talked to a lot of the entrepreneurial groups in the area here and ask them, how do these guys manage all the regulations? And their answer is, well, they usually just ignore them. They don't even know they're there. And then they get big enough and somebody comes and wallops them. And I'm thinking that is a problem.
Right.
So that's what we got started with. And our goal was to really go represent those family businesses that we think a family business stationed in California, headquartered in California, provides more to the area than a business that's not headquartered in California and just has a little bit of an operation here. So we think that's good for the state and good for the communities that we all serve. We think that we're very different and view the world differently than a publicly held company and how they make decisions. Would hopefully like to make the business environment in California such that people look at coming here again. I mean, I've had the opportunity to sit in some meetings with the Caterpillar folks who are looking to actually pull manufacturing back from Japan to the U.S. And they described the type of area they needed: well-educated, good access to a port, good access rail. I'm thinking California. After they stopped laughing, right. There's no way they'd even consider it. And I thought that's really not right for a state to watch, to chase away potentially great employers to really, bring good value jobs to the state. And so that's what this started with. And, we thought we'd come into it and be a little more positive about bringing legislation that would help all of us. It's really more of a defensive play, because it seems like every legislative session, there's just thousands of things that stuff regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation that are really tough to just manage. And they're all well-intended. I'm not knocking what the intention of them is. I think people, but 800 pages of labor law. We're a relatively mid-sized company. We don't have the resources to really manage 800 pages of labor law and understand that. So then you're engaging attorneys and outside consultants and spending the money to do that. And even then, it's not quite sure what you're getting. And then California, put a law in place that said a private attorney can do a class action suit against a particular company, called PAGA is the short version for that. And we've been faced with that. And I know a lot of businesses smaller than us. And it really becomes a shakedown. You get into it, you get sued, you either run the risk of going to court and probably not winning or settling. And the settlement is a big chunk to the attorneys and a little teeny bit to the employees and a little teeny bit to the state. Things like that don't help us be a successful business, and really takes your eye off the ball, and taking care of your customers and your employees. So that's a long-winded, very frustrated. That's why we got the Family Business Association of California going.
Yeah, I think it's, California and New York, the two places that I've lived and am from, are probably the most heavily regulated states in the United States. I can't imagine Caterpillar wanting to use the ports in either of those states, and probably a neighboring Philadelphia, not much better, I'm guessing. Yep. So if I understand it, I mean, a lot of these are consumer-related protections and employee and labor-related protections, but it leaves the entrepreneur fighting against things that are invisible, that they most oftentimes don't really know a whole lot about. And the bigger you are, the more you have to protect in terms of assets and risk. And but these are really big challenges to take on. So in your wildest of dreams, what would the Family Business Association accomplish in the next 3 or 10 years or 1 year? What would be what we call it a BHAG? I'm sure you know the term, big, hairy, audacious goal. What would be a home run, grand slam?
Well, to get the legislature to recognize the value of businesses, to get them to recognize that even employees want the opportunity to go work hard and succeed and grow with flexibility. You consult in businesses. What do employees want? They want flexibility. What does the legislature give us? More and more rigid rules we have to follow that actually, in a lot of ways, slow down an employee's ability to grow and do their job. For example, our employees have to take a lunch before 5 hours from their start time. They must take a lunch.
Right.
These are adults, for crying out loud. If I want to take a lunch at 6 or 7 hours or not a lunch at all, I should be given. You can't do that in California. Right. You cannot do that. It sets you up for a lawsuit. So my ultimate goal would be, you could go to the legislature and say people would value businesses. They would value that we bring things to the table, and that while there's some bad actors out there, the most of us really are here to help grow our communities and do a good job for our communities. Talking to a publicly held company CEO one time who did leave California, he said when he was debating whether to leave or not, he was told by a very high up legislator that businesses are fungible. They come and go. So they don't think they see any value in what we bring to the table. So that's really what we're trying to do, is to have them see the value that we bring, and craft things that make sense for all of us to grow together, not really just bang the living daylights out of us every year.
Well, all right. So we've covered a lot of ground here in about 45 minutes. And what does HOLT of California look like in 3 years or 10 years? Do you have a big, hairy, audacious goal for your company?
In 3 to 4 years, hopefully we have gone through a succession change, and I am more of a chairman role, and we've done a pretty significant change in that regard. It's hard to envision the future that way. I remember back to when I first joined the business, one of the Holts who had originally started the business happened to be in the offices. And I didn't know him that well, but I wanted to go in and thank him for the opportunity that he has provided for my dad, for me, and now for my family. And he looked me in the eye and in all sincerity said, "I don't know where you guys are going to go. All the big projects have been built, all the dams have been built, all the freeways have been built, all the stuff that Caterpillar equipment is used for." Pretty much he was like, "I'm not sure where you're going to go." And I walked out with, "Well, thanks for the real." Right. And the lesson I learned out of that, though, was, I don't think anybody then recognized what our opportunities were going to be in 10 or 15 years. But we are, well, from that size dealer, we're 10 times the size of that group now. Vibrant opportunities, things that none of us really saw have come to fruition. It's keeping your eyes open and jumping on it when it comes up, and recognizing there's some risk, but there's some certainly benefits to it. So hopefully I will have been rolled out in that 3 to 4 years, and we'll still be looking for great opportunities to grow, and things that I wouldn't even recognize as opportunities then will come up and we'll take advantage of them.
I'm sure. So it's not as big as Bill Gates is a computer in every desktop, or a Caterpillar in every garage, or or on the moon. But
I'll work on that after I get into the chairman role, and they can worry about executing here, and I'll go really think big.
Exactly. Well, look, so it goes for you folks listening still. The point of this story, a question is that sometimes vision, if it's so large, like putting a man on the moon, like, putting a computer on every desktop, it propels the business forward at an incredible pace. But another thing that, in the absence of having like a big, hairy, audacious goal, is the daily execution of our business to not just survive, but to thrive and to continuously employ, deserved workers and build a brand. And I mean, to last through generations. As everyone who has picked up my book knows, it's so difficult to make it into the fourth generation. You are in rare air. You're like, 3 to 7% or whatever the numbers of companies make it to the fourth generation. So congratulations on your success, many more years of it. And good luck to Ryan and to your son and your daughter and her child. So
thanks for the time, Jonathan. This has been great. I appreciate it very much.
Ken, thank you very much for being on the show. And folks, if you enjoyed this show, listen, subscribe, share it with your friends and family. And if you're a family member interested in being on my show, join me as a guest. Request to guest at the disruptivesuccessorshow.com. Thank you very much. Over and out.
Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.